Hello, my dear audiences. Welcome to the show, Jack Shao on the East-West Show with G&E TV. For the past few weeks, ever since the shooting of Paris, things get elevated on the day-to-day basis, added with the San Bernardino shooting, massive shooting. Lots of people died, 14 of them. Lots of people wounded, 21 or 25 of them. The whole country, if not the world, is really asking the same thing. Same question, what's happening? What's wrong? Okay, so it seems that we are lost in the ocean of questions needing for answers. Today, to get to the point, I really have to bring my crying baby to my good friend and very reliable source of professional information and analysis, my good friend, Honorable James Lee, founder and CEO of Lee Strategy, former Governor Peter Wilson's spokesman, and prior to that, the former advisor for President Bush, both 41 and 43. Honorable James Lee, welcome to the show.
Good. It's always good to be here, Jack.
All right, good. And every time when I'm here, when you're here, I feel kind of, okay, I can relax a little bit. I can bring the crying baby to you. Okay, now, back to the question. Right? The question is the same question, exactly the same question, asked by everybody in the United States, if not the whole world. What's happening?
Well,
what's wrong?
I think it's important to understand, I think it's important for a lot of your viewers to understand that terrorism in general has been around, frankly, for forever. So it's not an unusual thing. And, you know, sectarian terrorism, religious-based terrorism has been with us, you know, frankly, for the last 50, 60 years. So, you know, we first saw it before, for example, with the PLO takeover at the Munich Olympics in 1972. We saw it in various hijackings that occurred. We saw it through the hijacking of the Achille Lauro cruise ship. We saw it through, you know, the bombings in Beirut of the U.S. Marine Corps barracks. We saw it through, you know, the Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia. We saw it through modern times now with 9/11 and the Paris attacks and now San Bernardino. So the fact that terrorism has always kind of been with us is not frankly new. It's unfortunate. It's I think it's disturbing, but I think what a lot of people are reacting to is the random seeming nature of attacks against what are called soft targets, mostly civilians, and the fact that it's occurring here at home in the U.S., as well as Paris and Madrid and London and Sydney and all these other places around the world that typically are far removed from what we have considered the front lines of this kind of religious war occurring down in the Middle East. So I think that's what has a lot of people like reassessing basic issues of safety and security and how we have to deal with this rising threat, because it's now happening in our homes, in our schools, in our neighborhoods, in our government buildings. And instead of the U.S. Marines and the Army on the front lines, it's San Bernardino police and county sheriffs that are having to do the fighting.
Talking about the rise, though, if there's really a rise, is it because their activities are becoming on a more condensed way, or is it because of these media, especially social media, gets more convenient to have it exposed? So the fact is that at the present time, we see more instead of in the past we saw less.
Yeah, if you were to map out a curve of terrorist attacks, the number globally have not significantly risen except for the last couple of years. But what's changed is the targets of those attacks. Primarily, they were mostly confined within the Middle East, within war-torn areas, and they were directed against, you know, what we would call hardline regimes like in Libya and Egypt and Syria and so forth. And what's changed now is that the fight has kind of left those areas and gone abroad. You know, before we used to have to worry about maybe, you know, back in the old days, the PLO, and then later on Al-Qaeda. but it's morphed now into so many different terror groups that have really kind of risen up. We know most notably ISIS, but then you have Boko Haram, you have al-Nusra, you have Al-Qaeda, you've got all these different offshoots, and they're becoming bolder because they're working outside of these safe havens like in Syria and Iraq and Iran, and they're moving outward into the world. And that really is the most disturbing part about how terrorism is being exported. In the San Bernardino case, what has people really disturbed is that this appears to be a case of homegrown terrorism, where this couple was radicalized over a long period of time,
quite some time,
operated relatively in secret, and then went ahead and engaged in their activity. And I think that's what has people disturbed.
The worry, the trepidation lies in the fact that we had no problem when they fight amongst themselves, each other. Right? And then we have less worry if they target our military target, because our military has more or less power of responding.
Sure.
Right? To handle it. But it is the huge problem. It is the biggest problem that they target civilians.
Yeah.
Unarmed civilians. All of a sudden, somebody walks into the studio and starts shooting at you, and you're kind of doing nothing. You can't do nothing. Yeah. So that is the only thing that worries everybody on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think
it's getting tightened.
Yeah, and I think the difficulty comes when you look at the Democratic and Republican responses to these incidents, because frankly, neither side is really able to come up with a game plan to kind of address this stuff. President Obama's Oval Office speech the other day left a lot of things unanswered in terms of concrete steps to take.
We felt the same way, yes.
And then you also had, Donald Trump yesterday announcing that he wants to close all Muslims and not allow them in and have a religious test. So neither one of these ideas are very workable. Neither one of these speeches really offer the American people any kind of reassurance. I mean, in fact, if you look at the latest news today, the San Bernardino County Sheriff has reported an unprecedented number of applications for concealed weapon permits, because Americans, frankly, are left with the feeling that the government can't protect them, so they need to take steps to protect themselves.
You are right. Yes, exactly. And we probably, when we later come pick up that issue, we have a little bit to talk about more, even than the analysis of what's happening now. Okay, back to what's happening. Is there a reason, or is there supposed to be some kind of element that causes the shift of their targeting?
Well,
from moving from amongst themselves to the military targets, such as at Yemen to our vessels, right? And then so on and so forth. Now it is totally to the civilians. So is there anything that caused the move to do that?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at terrorism, in the early part, the last 20, 30 years, terrorism was principally aimed at very simple. There were demands associated with it. You took a plane hostage, you demanded the release of your compatriots and fellow terrorists, or that you demanded that the U.S. get out of X country. The terrorism that's occurring now is much more dangerous, because one, it comes with no demands. These are suicide attacks, principally.
You're right.
Suicide vests, suicide bombs, people going out in a blaze of glory. And they're targeting specifically civilians, if nothing else, for the sole purpose of inflicting maximum amount of casualties in a very short time. So what does that tell us about the operating philosophy of this terrorist movement? If you look at ISIS, for example, its concern, if you want to be technical, is the fulfillment of their apocalyptic vision of their particular strain of Islamic belief, which came out of the 5th century. And that belief, frankly, is rooted in the idea that they are quote unquote hastening end times by trying to eliminate all the infidels, so that their savior can return back to earth. That is the vision that they have, and that is the idea they have, is to go ahead and create a clean slate for people that share their particular religious belief. And that is not just directed at Christians or Jews or Hindus or whatever. They're directed at also other Muslims. So I think what people don't quite understand here in the U.S. is that within Islam, there are significant factions and breaks and shifts. I mean, one way to look at it would be whether or not, for example, a particular Christian belief sect, not Protestant or Catholic, but even much smaller, decided to go on the warpath and, start making bombs and taking over territory and invading countries. That is what we're up against, because the motivational belief that these people have is deeply rooted in their religious dedication. So these are people who are not out to try to print money or gain territory or pass a constitution or engage in international commerce. Their goal is to kill everyone that does not share their belief. And that's a fundamental obstacle that we have to get past, because we're not going to negotiate with these people. We're not going to accommodate or appease these people. We're not going to engage in some kind of dialogue with these people, because frankly they don't care. They don't want it and they don't need it.
Yeah, that being said, we understand that it has a strong orientation of religious pursuit, whatever, right? Be it right or be it wrong, whatever they have in their mind, they are willing to die for the quote-unquote their cause, something like that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now let's take a short moment now. When we come back, shall we touch from a historic point to see if it is really a time that we enter into another religious war, religious conflict? And question number two is that when that is so clear, how big is the representation of that concept, of that hate concept, right? So, shall we do that, please?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, my dear audience, let's take a very short moment today. Today, once again, I have the pleasure of having my good friend and the good friend, big friend of the community, Honorable James Lee, to come here to share his view on a higher level, to look down with a bird eye, see what's happening. He had been the advisor for both President George Bush 41 and 43, and later he became the spokesman of California former Governor Pete Wilson. And then I believe he has earned enough credentials for him to see in a bird view thing for what's happening. So we'll be right back, please.